You're listening to the Survivor Sweat Podcast with Mike Buchmiller and Russell Rosenblum. If you're looking for strategy articles and just about everything Survivor, head to survivorsweat.com. Now, let's get to it.
All right, welcome to Survivor Sweat Pod 17. Holy mackerel, I cannot believe we are here.
Are we done yet?
Oh my gosh. You know, a part of this was we discussed that the fact that there might be 15, 17, 18, 20 or more that, you know, hit the finish line here. And now we are down to the final four.
Yep.
Incredible.
It all just depends when the chalk goes down. I mean, it's inevitable. I mean, the probability they never go down is so low, you know?
Yeah, we've talked about this was a chalk pull for the first 9 weeks, and each week it's just been absolutely taking down an abundance of entries for sure. Yep. So we were last year's Jet entry. If you've not seen our pod before, and Jet is dead, we are not part of the final four for sure. Nope. But we are here to discuss the remaining entries. Circus Master, Jax Jags, LA Joneser, the Improbable Misclick, and Indiana Jet are your final fours that will survive. And it made it through week 16, both A and B. B was a little more easier as they were all on the same team.
Somebody was asked, I think it was Joneser that was asked, are you actually sort of hoping that Philly just loses and then you all just chop?
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to think about it. And he said no. And I had said to somebody else, I don't remember who asked me, and I said, I will bet you whether they admit it or not, I'd take the over-unders 2.5 of the entries, even if they don't admit it, would be just as happy if Philly just lost. And they just chop up the money and there's no more risk.
Yeah, there's something in the back of your mind there that it's just like, just get me to the finish line. Let me get something out of this because you're so emotionally and invested in it.
There's also no headache with the deal making. And look, I mean, we've said, if you're going to do it, you got to have a contract, got to go through a reputable source, and then you still got to hopefully never enforce it because the person shows up at the cage and there's no issue, but you might have to enforce it. If, Philly loses, there's nothing to enforce.
No, then it just gets split four ways.
Very easy.
And a lot of people, I saw some questions, people dove into the Twitter world and they're like, what happens when they all lose? That
was funny. I think David Williams had something out there. He had some people going, he was saying that if they all lose, Circa keeps the 9 million. Jeff Benson had to come in and go, no, we don't keep the 9 million.
No, somebody else mentioned, does it roll over for next year? One of these things. But no, if they all get clipped on the same weekend or the same week, if
they all automatically chop, it's just over. There's no other random tiebreaker of some other weird thing. It's and
Circa is not here to pocket any cash.
No, they don't charge any juice on the whole event. Everything gets paid back. They lose money.
They get great advertising from it. They probably make some money from their hedges and those things. But no, they do not keep any of that. It all gets distributed out to whoever wins or loses at the same time for sure. Yep, of course. Rod Beck Apples, who seemed like they were lined up perfectly, absolutely loved their entry. Not so much. Clipped. Golden Boy, team No Chop. Boom, he goes down and he took 5 others with him, of course. Man, did he get buried on Twitter. Jeez Louise.
Yeah, I don't want to go into too much of the specific detail other than the stuff around the chop, but you can go out there on Twitter, read it for yourself.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's true, what isn't true. I'm not going to,
Yeah. And, who knows how brash he is, but, coming out and.
Well, no, we see how brash he is. That I'll comment
making
on, that was pretty obvious.
No, but you don't know if he's being serious or just, getting rise, whatnot. But yeah, I mean, of course, when people put themselves out there, there's a lot of haters. People want to see people fail, which kind of sucks. I don't want to see anybody fail, but I mean, when you put yourself out there like that, it just brings those haters, it just is what it is. And, of course, here's your boy, LA Joneser, who took the Bears and survived.
And he actually took the Bears. It's good.
He took the Bears, and
he didn't misclick the Bears.
He publicly was out in front and telling the whole world who he was going to take.
Right.
And at first I was like, why is he doing this?
I love it. It's something we contemplated last year. It's an interesting spot.
Yeah.
If you think your other entries are sharp, they should not want to be, and we've said this all year, the whole reason you avoid the chalk is not just because they're the chalk. It's because other people are going to be on them, and you want to get as close as possible to being the only one on a team when you can do it within reason.
Absolutely.
Right.
So correct.
He's hoping that by announcing this, other people that might have been hemming and hawing, he said this, hemming and hawing and thinking about being on Chicago would not be. Now, we don't know, obviously, if that's the thing that had impact. I think one other entry was on them too, but we don't know if this caused impact for the other entries to not be on them or not. Now, a point, and he had pretty high level of confidence this wouldn't be the case because I believe he's been involved in all of the chop negotiations that I don't think were ever consummated, right? So the only time I wouldn't want to do that, where it'd be a massive disadvantage, is if the other entries, and I've talked about collusion in the past, if the other entries had already made a deal and were basically colluding against you, and if they now know you're on Chicago, it creates a lot of interesting dynamics. They can take one of their group entries, put them on Chicago, so you can never advance by yourself, take their other entries, spread them over different teams, so they can always advance you can never win by yourself, but they could. Right? 100%. So it puts you at a bit of a disadvantage there. But being, that wasn't the case. I think and when we come to this week, I think that's going to create, I'll comment on that when we come back after the break later and note about what some people might want to do this week with respect to that.
And there's some breaking news, and I'm not going to break it right now, but there's some interesting news out there. I actually got to see him on Visson. He was interviewed, and he discussed, verbally being out there taking the Bears, and he did confirm that he was doing it to deter anybody else. And I did see some sharp individuals out there talking about the equity of each entry and the fact that he was on the Bears, and the minute that he pushed the Bears, his entry increased in equity because he had more of an option to be away from the chalk and the individuals that did take Denver. And so bravo to him. It wasn't an easy game. It looked easy, but anytime you push that button, the Bears are not a credible team. They can play well, but as we've discussed, there's only a handful of credible teams. And, we all think that the Niners are a credible team, and wow, I mean, these things just happen.
Yeah, bad games happen. And it's funny there because not specifically about Survivor, obviously, but you look at the Niners, they're still the odds-on favorite to win the NFC and win the Super Bowl, I believe, overall. I don't think it's that close. And then you look at Brock Purdy, right? So as people may know, somebody bought, he had an MVP ticket that somebody bought for a big number last week.
120, I think it was.
Paid 120,000 where it could pay 180 or something, 150.
I think 200K
200,
where it
and it looked, he was just a massive favorite at that point. The odds were minus 150, minus 130, something like that. He wasn't even a plus number, which is very unusual. And then he went, depending on the book you look at, after one game, he went from, we'll call it minus 135, because I don't recall exactly what it was, from plus 650 at Circa, and I heard he was plus maybe 1,400 at DraftKings. I mean, the numbers were massive. To basically the stone lock to there's no chance he's winning. It's like almost like he got arrested for point shaving or something. Like it was unbelievable. And look, I know your opinions on this. We've talked about it. At this point, does he win? Probably not. People debated whether he should have won before, but there was no clear favorite here that wasn't a quarterback, because they always take quarterbacks, it seems. It's like the quarterback award, which is a problem. If they're going to take a quarterback, I don't know, like if Lamar gets smoked against Miami, and like obviously if Lamar now crushes Miami and wins out, whatever, maybe he does get the MVP. But you look at his numbers, Purdy still actually has better numbers than Lamar all year, right? And he'll end with better numbers. It's almost impossible for Lamar to actually catch him. So you then look and say, okay, well, if Lamar tanks against if Miami makes Lamar look the way Baltimore made Purdy look, and I don't think they'll do that, but if nobody thought, of course, that this would happen in San Francisco either. If 100%. Miami does that and Purdy has two stellar games, I don't know what they do. I mean, you're supposed to just pick, Tua and he hasn't really had a great year, and it's okay. You're supposed to probably pick Hill or pick CMC, but they're not quarterbacks. So I don't know what they're really going to do there. It's going to be interesting.
And the fact that it's a standalone game, on Christmas, everybody's watching.
None of it should matter. It all matters.
It's like the late Heisman favorite, and he has one bad game at the end. So it's what everybody sees last. And, they're just not going to give Purdy it now over Lamar Jackson.
Correct. There was always the whole question of, is he a system quarterback? But look, and I'm not saying that Purdy at this stage of his career would be incredibly unreasonable to make this comparison. But the reality is, I am quite sure Joe Montana had terrible games. John Elway had terrible games. Dan Marino, Tom Brady, they all had, just abysmal games. It happens.
Yep. No, absolutely. All right. So back to this Circa Survivor contest.
Yes.
And not the props. Okay. So let's recap. So part one, which is 16 part one, 6 hit the skids. So 60% of the pool went down. As we started with 10 that entered, there's now 4, as we'd mentioned, the final 4 of the 9,267 entries remain through week 16A and B. And B was the Eagles. Everybody took the Eagles. I mean, can you imagine the person, you're saving the Chiefs. You think you're going to isolate yourself. You're going to be in the perfect spot there. I mean, the guy that owned the Chiefs or had the Chiefs, probably glad that he died before. I mean, come on. I mean, that is just ridiculous.
That would have been way more painful to die with the Chiefs there in a good spot. Incredible. And then watch the Philly game where Philly almost blows a lead.
Yeah. No, it's unbelievable. Which he would have needed for the tie.
Right. Yeah. No, it would have been the torture.
Yeah. And we're done talking about the no picks. I think all 4 of these guys are getting in. So we're past that. And I believe last year at this time, I know. When we walked into week 17, there were 3 left.
That is true.
This year, there is 1 more than last year, but yeah. And by the way, it probably should be 3 if Jones didn't misclick.
Correct. So, and it's also out of a much bigger field this year. So it's roughly 50% bigger field and, 33% more entries. And so, it's a far larger percentage of the field that is busted.
Oh, yeah. And just by trolling Twitter, I can tell this thing is going to launch past 10,000 next year for sure.
Oh, yeah. I'd be shocked if it doesn't.
12,000. Could be more. Who knows? But yeah. So on the Survivor Sweat X handle, as we had mentioned that before, right after the lock, we thought that the Broncos would be the chalk, as we mentioned on last week's pod. And if you had the entry, you should take the Rams and isolate yourself, which they did. And we hope they selected them, and they did. We said fortune favors the bold, and if we were still in, we'd be looking at the Packers, Bears, and as you mentioned, the Jets. Jets.
I was honest, and I did say, look, I'm not sure I could pull the trigger on them, and I think, as you said, we'd be having a pretty big knockdown drag out if we were talking about it. But I did say they had to be in the conversation. They had to be in the conversation. Small correction. I mean, I noticed on the Twitter handle, it noted the reason I liked them was because of low availability. I mean, technically, they had infinite availability. Everybody had.
Oh, yeah. No, of course.
Nobody's ever going to use them.
It was those range of teams that were going to have the low ownership. We were trying to dig out any teams that we can take other than the Broncos, because we just are not going to be on a team where 60% of the pool is going to be on.
If we were there and they were there and they were our only 2 options, the Broncos or the Jets, you would have hated it. We'd have been on the Jets.
I know
we were just never going to be on the Broncos. Would not happen.
100%. I know it. I would have hated it. I would have tried to find some other team that had the better metrics.
Correct.
But we would have not been on the Broncos.
We would not be on the Broncos.
Style. It's not what we do, for sure. Yep. So that is our wrap for week 16A and B. Not really much to discuss. I'm really excited to discuss the possibilities.
That'll be a lot more interesting.
Coming into week 17. We will see you after the break.
Time for a message from our sponsor. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back with the Survivor Sweat Podcast.
If you live out of state but want to enter any of the biggest football handicapping contests in Las Vegas, you've come to the right place. Football Proxy is the most professional proxy service in Las Vegas and can serve as your trusted proxy to enter your picks each week for the Super Contest, Circa Sports Millions, or Circa Survivor contests. What makes Football Proxy different from other proxies? Well, like other proxies, we have late selection deadlines and an easy-to-use web portal to submit your picks each week. But, unlike other proxies, we allow our customers to change their picks anytime before the pick deadline, which is crucial when gathering last-minute information. Ask another proxy if they allow you to make changes to your picks and see their reaction. It's what makes us the top-rated proxy service in Las Vegas. To get started, fill out the contact form and a representative will contact you to answer any questions and schedule an appointment. Then book your trip to Las Vegas and meet us at the designated casino to get signed up. Once the season starts, sweat the action all season long with your picks. Schedule an appointment today and compete against the world's best for your chance at millions.
And we're back. Week 17. Let's tee it up for our listeners and for the 4 remaining survivors. Wow. If you had, to forecast the year and to think of what teams you may be taking down the line, if you had the Browns as being the favorite here, if you have the Browns, not just the Browns, but the Browns versus the Jets, with Joe Flacco.
Yeah, this your bingo card?
No.
No Aaron Rodgers.
No.
Not only no Aaron Rodgers and no Deshaun Watson, but literally like Joe Flacco.
No.
And then no Nick Chubb.
No Nick Chubb.
And a favorite in a game.
They are 7.5-point favorite, 76% win rate. They are the best play remaining heading into week 17, and only one gentleman can take them, and that is Circus Master. So he will be on the Cleveland Browns. Just hit the button. I
would be kind of shocked if he's not. I mean, I doubt he's saving them for next week where they're 50-50 at Cincinnati.
No, he's in a great spot, but we have some breaking news. Yep. I mean, this is real time. Russell Wilson has just been benched.
Wow.
He is not going to start for the Denver Broncos this week. And the Denver Broncos were the second favorite. They were 69% win rate. They were 5.5-point favorites, and all could take them. I don't think all of them would have, obviously.
Right, of course.
Master. And I think there's another path for another entry. But now what do you do? I mean, I had Indiana Jet and LA Jones are just all but locked in here for the Broncos. And now I don't think you can take them. I just don't.
I mean, look, if Sean Payton is benching him, it's because he believes whoever he's popping in there is going to give him a better chance to win. But I understand. Like, I don't think he's benching him just to look for the future. I think he gives him a better chance to win, whatever that means.
Think? Well, I don't think that these two entries believe that the other guy gives him a better chance to win.
No, I know. I know. I mean, he probably does. I'm sorry. Who's the quarterback? Who's playing?
I think it's like Stitchum.
Oh yeah, I remember him.
Yeah. I mean, are they really trying to take a look at this guy? I mean, like, what are we doing?
Did him?
Yeah.
Nah, maybe. I don't. I think they believe he gives him a better chance to win.
I don't believe so. I think they're sending a message that they're going to move off Wilson.
Sure, but I think he believes it gives him a better chance to win. I don't know that he's really doing it just to take a look instead. I mean, it's possible, but I think he's still trying to win over there. But either way, you're right. I mean, I don't think I'm pulling the trigger on Denver myself here. So
yeah.
But they all have other options.
So let's backtrack just a second. The Browns and Jets game is a Thursday night game, so they will tip off tomorrow night. You know how much I hate those Thursday night games.
I do.
I just feel like, I mean, the turnaround time for these teams, it used to be a huge advantage for the home teams, but teams just travel too much. They travel much, much better. And I believe if you have a better coaching staff, which I actually think Cleveland does, I don't think they can get their game plan in time. I don't think there's that big of an advantage. So whatever advantage they have gets shrunk. And so, I mean, the Jets are no pushover. I mean, they're still out there, playing for their coach.
No, they've played. I mean, notwithstanding the Miami game and a couple other games, they've played. I mean, they've lost a lot of games, but they've played a lot of those games very close.
Yeah, yeah. And now that the coach has been reassured that he's coming back next year in the GM, they're evaluating these players. And so these players they got to roll up their sleeves and get after it. This is their coach next year if they want their job.
Right.
And so they're going to be in it to win.
That said, it's moot, because if you're Circus Master, if we're Circus Master, I mean, I don't know what you're telling me. If you tell me Joe Flacco isn't playing, I don't know who the next guy up is, but you're still taking Cleveland. It's too big an edge when otherwise you're locked up with other teams. Now, there's another big edge there, and I don't want to short circuit this, but I am going to run a comparison here real quick. The other reason you take them, although he's taken them anyway, to be clear, people have asked about hedging constantly. I had somebody on our YouTube page ask about hedging, and I chose to reply over there, and I gave very round numbers, probably a lot of typos. But the thing with hedging is when you can do it, you don't want to do it many weeks because it gets exponentially more expensive. And you also want to do it when you have a very large favorite, because then your cost to hedge is a lot less. So just very quickly here, I'm going to compare Denver. Like if you were to take Denver compared to if you were to take Cleveland, what a hedge looks like this week, right? Yep. So just to pick round numbers, because you could try to hedge for all different amounts of money, whatever you want to do. But just to use a simple amount that I know you can get down, you could put down $100,000 on the Jets, and you would get plus 280 right now at Circa. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now you've also got to bet the tie. Reach out to Jeff Benson about that, because don't forget, ties do lose in Survivor, and you wouldn't win anything on your hedge because it would just push. You get your money back, right? Correct. So some people prefer to go to point spread route. I prefer to go the money line route, and again, I'll explain why. So you put 100,000 to win 280, whereas if you were on Denver, you would have to, if you put $100,000 down, it only wins 150. Because the Chargers are only getting 150, right? So to get 280, you're putting down almost $200,000, which would get you 300, right? So it's about 190, 185, something like that, right? Right. You've got to hedge almost twice as much to get the same return. And it's worse than that, because now it depends, what are you looking at next week for your hedge? Sure. So if you win your hedge, you're done. You're out of the, Survivor's over for you, doesn't matter. But if your Survivor entry wins, if Cleveland wins, you have lost $100,000. So next week, if you get a team that's only plus 150, you're going to have to bet, 200,000 to win 350, which gets you your 100,000 back, right? So if you had the other team that wasn't as big a favorite, it's even more expensive, because you've already got 200,000 in for this week. If they're plus 150 again, now you got to bet like another roughly 200,000, I guess, right? And so it's costing you almost twice as much to hedge. And remember, it's exponential. So twice as much this week, that means you got to double it again for next week. That said, I've always said this to you, Mike, and I think I said this in the pod. I think the ideal time to start hedging in this thing, if you're still in, has almost nothing to do with the number of entries left. It has to do with how much time is left. And I think the sweet spot is roughly 16B. You could argue 16A. I think it's 16B. Or now, obviously, 16B or later, just because you're then only hedging 3 times. So if it's 100,000, then 200, then 400, you're going to need $700,000 to do that if it reaches the whole way, right? Sure. But it's theoretically doable. If you even hedge one more week earlier, it could be 1, 2, 4, 8. Now you need over $1 million, and you've got to hope Circa takes the bet for 800,000. Now I know Jeff Benson has said we will take 7-figure bets, whatever, and to some degree they would. But you go back a couple more weeks, now you're asking him to take a $9 million. Like you could end up having to bet $9 million in the end to net $100,000. Either way, like it becomes crazy, right? So this is the time where I think hedging is very reasonable, particularly if you don't make any deal. Even if you do make a partial save, like some sort of reasonable hedge, it's a good time to look at it. Yeah, and also wait until the picks are out.
And to your point, I mean, there are people out there going, hey, you shouldn't be looking to make a deal because, Jeff Benson's offering credit line to make it,
Right. I don't know how big the credit line is.
But the difference between a save and a hedge is it's night and day. If you're making a save, it's no out-of-pocket money up front. You're making you're making a save with somebody. Yes, of course, you got to get a contract. You have to be in communication with that person. You have to hope that contract, they get to the, the window and everything's fine and you don't have to enforce it. I get all that. But at Survivor Sweat, they have the paperwork, they have the contract, they've executed it.
And to be blunt, of these 4 people, I honestly don't know. I don't say this as a criticism of any of them, and I would assume they wouldn't take it that way. I have no idea of these 4 people who has $100,000 at the cage someplace. Do all of them? Maybe they all have no issue with 100 grand at the cage. And it's more than that because it's 100 this week and then probably 200 next week, give or take, depending on. And by the way, that's just a hedge to make a couple $100,000. If you're trying to hedge to lock up at least $1 million,
yeah,
and now you're betting $1 million this week and possibly 2 million next week. I don't want to say I don't believe none of these four have $3 million that they're going to stick at the cage, but it would surprise me. The over under on that to me would be, 0.5.
Yeah.
That have
And
access to the money.
Because Circa's giving you credit, I'm not sure they're giving you credit for $3 million.
They can if you deserve credit for $3 million, nothing to do with Survivor. The thing that would be interesting for Circa, and I don't know if they would do this, they're pretty sharp. If this was not week 17, if it was week 18, and they already see the picks in, the implied value, the actual result based on who wins or loses. Literally, you will know the result of how much money you get. That's a point where they could give a credit line on your actual ticket. Right. I have no idea what gaming regulations are for that. If they're allowed to lend money against the ticket, I have no idea. But theoretically, they'd know the economics. As of today, they'd have to force you, in order to lend you money, they would have to say, okay, you must bet these two teams in order. They don't know what the line's going to be next week on the team on the team opposite the one you're going to take, and nor can they force you to make that bet. Yeah. So I'm not saying it's an illusion. I think they're right to set up credit lines, but you're going to have the cash set it up. And this goes to what I've said, and I put it out on the Circus Twitter handle last week, and I mentioned it on the pod, I believe too. This is where I do believe that people have asked, potential changes to Survivor. My opinion, just my opinion. I don't know if they'll do it. I doubt they'll do it. I think when you get down to the last 10, they should put 100,000 in everybody's sports betting account. Obviously, it comes out of the pool. And everybody else plays for first. It'll reduce the amount of hedges, the amount of saves and deals that are made. And it gives these people at least 100 grand at the cage. So they can try to hedge 50,000 this week, 50,000 next week, whatever it is. Or even if they hedge 100,000 this week and they're willing to fly blind next week, maybe they lose the 100,000, but they're not coming out of pocket 100,000 to do it, right? It's a very big difference. And I think, it is what it is. That's a disadvantage to us in a way, because I know we could scrape up the capital to hedge almost whatever we needed to hedge. Sure. So it's a big advantage if you can hedge and someone else can't.
Yeah. All right. So I think that covers that hedging portion. Let's discuss some of these other teams.
Yeah, sorry, but that's just because people keep asking about the hedging.
No, of course. No,
the picks will be somewhat straightforward, but yeah.
It's very informative, and I'm glad that we touched on it here for sure. So if the Broncos are now a question mark, going down the list here, you got the Texans -3.5 versus the Titans. Now CJ Stroud can be back now. It's very possible. You got the Colts -3 versus the Raiders. And what Raider team is going to show up? I mean, wow, incredible. And then you got the Bears now -3 versus the Falcons. They're 59% win rate. The Falcons, it's another, these are teams that you just don't know who's going to show up on any given week. And then one last team that I'm going to throw in there, and it's because it's the Sunday night game, which will give people an option when you're talking about those hedging possibilities, to have all that information at Sunday night, the last game. You got the Vikings -2 versus the Packers. Now, I mean, they're a 55% win rate, but they are the last game on the slate. So there is some form of advantage, if you can call it that. The Broncos were going off at 125, which led me to believe that I felt like they would be, not only they were the second best win rate team, both percentages and point spreads, but they were also going later in the day, so that if somebody did move over to the Texans, if somebody did move over to the Colts, you would already have the Jets result, the Browns result, and then you would have the results from the Texans, Colts, and Bears as well. So, I mean, there is an advantage of knowing how many teams are
there is. And by the way, one of the clear advantages goes back to the hedging, right? So right now, if you're choosing to hedge, you know that you can't say I'm hedging because I could win 9 million. What you're supposed to be doing is saying hedging because I could win, 2.3 or whatever the number is here, right? It's the four people, the 9 million and change divided by 4, right?
Correct.
But you could get, if you're on Sunday night or a Monday night or something, not that that's one of the options here, but if you're on the Sunday night and everybody else is eliminated, you've got a free hedge, like it's up to 9 million. It's the whole thing, right? Absolutely. Or it's only you and one other person. If you both lose, you're splitting up and you're getting 2.5, and if you win, you're going to get so you have some idea immediately where you're at. Whereas if you don't know if people are busting yet, you really have to base it just on your max win is the 2.3-ish.
Yeah.
It changes the dynamic a bit. But that said, and we've said this early on too, I wouldn't go take a Sunday night game you hate just because it gives you a little better hedging options.
Oh no. Yeah.
But if you're really unsure and you're flipping a coin, basically,
yes,
it's probably worth waiting and holding out rather than flipping the coin. Take the later game.
yes.
And then, so as you look at these, as you said, so if we assume Circus Master is going to go ahead and take Cleveland, which I think is a pretty safe assumption, he's one of the guys with Minnesota. So obviously he's not taking Minnesota, he's taking Cleveland. So now you look at the Jets, the Jags, and Joneser. And two of them have Minnesota. Only one of them has Chicago. So he may hate Chicago. If he hates Chicago, he'll go another route. But if he thinks it's all a coin flip, he may as well just take Chicago because he knows no one else is taking him. Because he knows Circus Master's not taking
I had it here. I had Circus Master is obviously taking the Browns. I had Indiana Jet and Joneser on the Broncos, and I had Jags on. I mean, he can isolate himself.
Yeah, right.
It's a chance.
But now you take Indiana and Joneser off Denver, probably. One thing I would do if I were Indiana Jet and or Joneser is do what Joneser did last week. I'd get out there today or early tomorrow before the Thursday game. And although I guess you could wait because none of those people are taking the Thursday game. They're all waiting. And announce who he's taking.
Yeah.
He could lie.
Sure.
He could bluff, but there's no real reason to. See, in poker, this is called either implied collusion or actual collusion, depending on your perspective, right? This is why in tournaments, like, I raise, you move all in, and I have two aces. They're not going to let me. Well, I'm sorry, you raise, I move all in. You're thinking they're not going to let me turn my hand over and show you I have two aces because then you're going to fold.
Yeah.
I may want you to fold because of how the payout chumps work.
Yeah.
Right. So this is kind of what's happening here. In poker, that's not allowed. Here it's allowed.
Yeah. So
I can get out there and tell you who I'm picking.
So if we're playing that route, Indiana Jones or Indiana Jet and LA Joneser should jump out there and say, I'm taking the Texans right now. I mean, they're the highest favored, 64% -3.5. If CJ Stroud's back, I mean, and
then you put the other guy in a little bit of a box, right?
Yeah.
So you announce I'm taking Houston. Now, let's say Joneser announces I'm taking Houston. Indiana Jet can get out there and go, so am I. And now maybe Joneser changes his mind, right? This is sort of the game within the game within the game. Okay.
Yeah.
And now if you're Jags, you could go, well, look, I'm taking Houston because I hate my other options, right? I just hate them. Or you could go, I'm not getting involved in this game within a game within a game. I'm just taking Chicago.
Yeah.
And I'm hedging or I'm not hedging or whatever it is you want to do. It'll be interesting to see which way they go. And I know last year we went through the same thing. Which way is everybody else going to pick and what are we going to pick? And we knew it was 16B where it was less obvious. 17 and 18 were pretty straightforward for us, but it was 16B where I remember after 16A, when we get this really lucky win with Pittsburgh over the Raiders, and we looked up and it was 4 of us left and we could have taken Miami or Tampa Bay. Everybody else was either Miami. They couldn't have they had no other options. It was like Miami. One person I think had like Miami or the Chargers on Monday, something like that, right?
Yeah.
But it was very obvious we were going to be with one other person no matter who we took.
Yeah.
And so it's which one do we want to be with? But none of them were going to be able to isolate. Because whichever one we took, it was just going to be who. Well, one guy did ultimately isolate. He took Miami, got knocked out.
Yeah. And if they somehow get by this week, and there's multiple that do, if this thing continues into week 18, looking ahead is absolutely positively gross.
And it's week 18.
Yeah, week 18.
It's the NFL week 18 is always gross.
Yeah, of course. And so you have LA Joneser, who looked like they had an advantage because they had Detroit versus Minnesota, and he's the only guy that can take Detroit. But if Detroit's out of the number 1 seed, I don't know how Campbell plays this.
Nobody knows. This issue happened last year with Minnesota, with one of the guys. We thought he was going to take Minnesota, I believe, and he went out and took was it the Colts versus Houston or something, and like the two cellar dwellers playing for a draft choice. Like,
I believe he got caught up in the coach. I believe he got caught up in the coach speak.
He did. The coach said, "I'm going to rest my guys."
Yeah, and he did, but it wasn't until the third quarter when they had a 24-point lead or something to that. effect.
Correct.
And so, I mean, you got to think Campbell doesn't just lay down. I mean, he's not the kind of guy that lays down, but he also has to know that some of his key guys need a little breather. So, you know, and Minnesota could be playing for something. So,
right. But you look down the list. I mean, how many teams do you have here? Like, if I look down the list,
Raiders, Broncos,
biggest favorites in general, it's San Francisco, they're dead. Baltimore, Dallas, Kansas City, Philadelphia. I'm assuming nobody has any of those teams, right? So
no.
Then you've got Detroit, as you noted. You said one guy has Detroit. Then you got, Tampa Bay, Jacksonville, Seattle, New Orleans. I mean, these are,
nobody has Jacksonville.
So I'm literally just reading down the list. I'm not even saying somebody has them. Right.
100%. It's Detroit,
They're just
Minnesota for
spots.
Joneser. He has Detroit. There's Raiders, Broncos. They all have them if they don't take Broncos this week. Colts, Texans.
They all have them. They all have both the Raiders and the Broncos. Who do you like? Who would you be taking? The Raiders, I guess.
Maybe the Raiders at home now. Yeah, I mean, with Russell Wilson out, I don't know what's going on now.
Head coach, although they're now saying he has the job, he's still sort of playing for a job. If he loses his last two, who knows?
Oh, these guys are playing for this dude. They're playing for him.
And he's coaching for him.
Yeah.
I don't mean that I just mean that in a sense of he knows he needs to win. Like we've talked about this before. It's almost so unfair when a guy gets an interim coaching job.
Yeah.
He almost never becomes the full-time coach.
Yeah.
And then he almost always has to leave the team.
Yeah, of course.
Because you can't have a head coach come in and like have a guy that used to be the head coach. It's never going to work.
No, I had the Raiders Broncos here because there'd basically be a coin flip. But now with this Broncos situation, it could, Raiders could be favored, 4, 5.5 there, depending on what
this goes back to. We had early in the year, I know you had this penciled in as a win for the Broncos. I know you did. Okay. Yeah. And then I would say even a couple of weeks ago, we had penciled in the Chargers-Raiders game as a win for the Chargers up until Herbert's not playing and then Stick is playing. And then suddenly it becomes the Raiders should be favored in the game. I don't know what week 18 is going to look like. The Raiders could plausibly be playing to make the playoffs.
It's absolutely mind-boggling.
It's not likely. I think technically, can they win the division? I think that's how they make the playoffs. I think they can technically win the division because of the win against KC.
I did hear a scenario that if they win their final 2 remaining games
and KC loses out, I'm sure.
There's also a chance they just backdoor into that wild card.
There is.
It's just crazy. So, yeah, they got to get through week 17 first. And so now that Wilson's out, that throws a whole wrench into what's going on here. So this is going to be some drama. This is going to be an interesting reveal on Saturday night. I'm excited to see it. I mean, it'll
be fun. I'm always excited to see it.
So crazy. So the current appraisals, they have Circus Master at 3.46 million, LA Jones at 2.5, Jet and Jags at 1.62. But again, this is now all changed with Russell Wilson out, in my opinion, because this was factoring in that they had an opportunity to take him. They still do. And who knows, maybe they still just stay on him. I don't know.
It's interesting. With him out, it probably, and I hate to say this, it'll lower the probability someone wants to make a deal. It will probably increase the value of Circus Master that was never going to go Denver anyway.
Never.
And the value will come away from the other teams that at least had them as an option.
And over at Survivor Sweat Marketplace, if you still want to get in this, there is one entry. It's selling.
Hope it's one of these 4.
It is one of these 4. And I have a pretty good idea who it is.
How'd you figure it out?
Yeah, you just look at the teams. So it's one entry. They are selling 2% for $35K. The implied entry, the current implied entry, not based on the appraisals, but is 2.316750. So that's some good change there. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it. It's LA Joneser's entry. So if you feel like fate is on his side,
it's true,
and he is going to run this thing out, jump on board. Jump on board. Well, that will do it for pod 17, week 17 here coming. Hit us up on the Survivor Sweat X handle or go over to the platform. We have a discussion board. We love talking about the contest. It's coming down to the wire here. I remember last year being in this situation and oh my gosh, it was so exciting. I mean, I wanted it to end but I didn't want it to end.
Correct.
It was just the most amazing ride. And so of all people, we have a pretty good idea of how these individuals are feeling. And I wish them nothing but the best. I mean, maybe they all four just chop this thing or win out,
Maybe. But they could also lock up $1 million, play for the rest, lock up $500,000, lock up $100,000.
Yeah. Just to walk away with this at this point, and not get some real money here is just devastating, and so, but it happens. And that's why the contest is so freaking exciting.
It is. And at this point, you are going to be all these four guys and whatever partners they have, if any, they're all going to be, eating, drinking, sleeping, Survivor. It's not just a game.
Yes.
It's everything that's going into every injury report, every deal thought, every concept of any save thought. What's our entry worth? All that stuff. It's going to be 24/7.
100%. You leave no stone left unturned. This was my whole life last year.
Yep.
And there wasn't nothing. I don't remember not knowing. I mean, there was just, it consumes you.
Yeah, it does. The only thing that was funny for us was there was no real, we had so many knockdown dragouts about our picks through the year. And week 17, 18, they were what they were. Like we knew both weeks ahead of time. There was really nothing to talk about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Which is almost worse.
And I've, when Derek did the reveal last Saturday, you probably already know this information if you're listening to this and you're in the contest, but reach out to him. He would love to have you go and watch the games down there. And
absolutely. It's a great guy. He's a lot of fun.
They roll out the red carpet. They're the most amazing individuals and host, and Circa just does such a great job. Their host, Derek himself, Jeff Benson, Mike Palm. I mean, they are just class act, and they treated us as such. And as he's mentioned to me, we are now family for life, being in that, ring of winners, if you will, of Survivor. And I know they do it for the Circa Millions as well.
Yep.
And so, there's something to be said for winning this contest. And I'm just, happy we got to do it one time. And, I wish nothing but the best for these four guys. And I hope
absolutely. Enjoy your 15 minutes, or in this case, your 20 weeks.
Yes. I hope you get there.
Exactly.
All right. So for week 17, that is the wrap up. Look forward to seeing everybody next week and how this all shakes out.
Keep surviving.
And get your pick in.
Looking for Survivor strategy articles? Did you lose your last entry on a Survivor contest and wish you could rebuy? Check out our marketplace and you may find what you need. Head over to survivorsweat.com for all things Survivor. And we'll see you next week for the next Survivor Sweat podcast.